Thanks again, Steph, for helping this morning. Thanks again, Steph, for helping this morning. Okay, I think we are live. So good morning, everybody, or good day, I should say, as people probably in the afternoon in some parts of Canada, of course. So once again, I'm John Hanesiak from University of Manitoba, acting as the plenary chair this morning. So thank you, everybody, for attending once again. So like yesterday, I'll do the introduction in English. And once again, Stephen Derry from UNBC was kind enough to do the same in French. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all lands that we are on today. From across Canada, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So this morning, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Myrle Ballard from University of Calgary, who will be giving a talk titled, "What Does Indigenous Science and Anishinaabe Mowin Say About Weather?" Anyways, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I think. So Dr. Ballard is Associate Professor in the Department of Earth, Energy, and Environment at the University of Calgary. She stood up the new Indigenous Science Division in Environment Climate Change Canada. She is Anishinaabe heritage from Lake St. Martin First Nation. And chatting with her just briefly this morning, she drove down here all the way from St. Martin First Nation. It took her 3 hours to get to Winnipeg this morning, so I'm sure she's a little tired of driving through the rain. And her latest research explores three-eyed seeing and how her fluency in Anishinaabe-Mowin can transform approaches to water resource management using Anishinaabe-Mowin baseline indicators for monitoring. So I think her talk will be between 35 and 45 minutes, and we'll have some time for questions after that. So Steph, if you want to take away, please.
Merci, John. Bonjour à vous tous et bienvenue à cette deuxième session plénière du congrès SCMO 2024. Je suis Stéphane Derry de UNBC à Prince-Georges sur le territoire ancestral de la Première Nation Clé-Clé-Tenay. De plus, nous reconnaissons aujourd'hui le territoire ancestral et non cédé de tous les peuples autochtones d'un océan à l'autre. J'ai le plaisir aujourd'hui de vous introduire le Dr. Myrle Ballard de l'Université de Calgary. Il va faire une présentation intitulée « Que disent la science autochtone et Anishinaabe Mowin à propos de la météo ?» And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ballard for the presentation.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much. Myrle Ballard, Anishinaabe. I got to do my introduction in my own language because it is the first language of Canada. Myrle Ballard, Anishinaabe, Obaskotang Donchi. I got this in the manum Giuseppe where Anishinaabe Kenda Mowin and in Anishinaabe Kidwat and Jesuit Buck. This okay, got the Bachimutunim. So I'm saying what I said was my name is Myrle Ballard, and I'm going to be talking this morning about Indigenous science and Anishinaabe and what we know about the weather, what it says about the weather. And I'm just going to give a little bit of background about myself so that you know where I'm coming from. I am from Lake St. Martin First Nation, and for those of you that don't know, which is in central Canada. And we call Lake St. Martin Obashkodeang, which means in Anishinaabe language, Obashkode, where it bursts from the heart. Like if you look at the map of North America, I say that we are from the belly button of North America, and Lake St. Martin was formed by a meteor, and it's a crater. And so Lake St. Martin is Obashkodeang. Ode means heart. So that's where I'm from, Lake St. Martin. And I am a fluent Anishinaabe speaker. That's my mother tongue. That's the first language I learned when I grew up. And I still speak it today. I am fluent. I came from Lakes Martin, and that's where I speak my language most regularly, because all the my relatives, Nichisanak and Dinaway are still living out there, and a lot of them still speak their language. So I'm going to be talking about Indigenous science, three-eyed seeing. I'm going to be talking about our relations and Anishinaabe laws, and specifically the language law of Anishinaabe laws, because this is where I'm going to be basing what I talk about when I talk about Anishinaabe and weather. Probably most of you have heard about two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing was coined by a Mi'kmaq elder, Albert Marshall, when to make reference to looking at things from a Western lens, an Indigenous lens, and coming up with solutions from both of these lenses. So this is what two-eyed seeing is about, and we can use this framework in all of the application, most of the applications that we work with. So Indigenous science, I started up the new Indigenous Science Division at Environment and Climate Change Canada back in January 2022. I was asked to start it. So I started it up, and what I was asked is to start Indigenous knowledge, but Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous science are not the same thing. There were two different things. Just like we talk about the Western science, Western knowledge systems, they're two different things, and this is the same as Indigenous science. Indigenous science is distinct. It's time-tested. The way we test Western science, that's the same thing. When we make formulas, the Indigenous medicinal knowledge holders, they know what to do when they create the medicines. They rely on the chemical reactions. They have a formula, and that's the same thing. They're not different. They're not any different from the Western science. And it's about the knowledge of the environment, the knowledge of the land, the knowledge of the air, the ecosystems. That this is what Indigenous science is. The knowledge that Indigenous peoples have, and with this knowledge, this enabled them, the Indigenous peoples, to survive since a time immemorial. And it includes multiple systems of knowing, like the same way Western science is. It's different disciplines, and this is the same with Indigenous science, but it's not siloed, right? Like Indigenous Western science is. Indigenous science is one, and it's the knowledge of plants, the weather, the animals, etc. And it's knowledge from way back to the present. So the oral tradition, the oral history, and it's real-time science as well, because Indigenous peoples, being stewards of the land, they know what's happening, what's happening with the land's water. They know what's happening with the weather, and they know the changes in weather, what that means with the ecosystem, whether it's going to be an early spring, a late spring, a wet spring, dry spring, etc. Like a dry summer or cold winter. They know what's going to happen, and based on what's happening with lands and waters, with the animal behavior, with real time. And Indigenous science is important because there's been declarations that have been passed at the international level. For example, at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, where it says there that Indigenous peoples' knowledge of the land needs to be included in curriculums. It needs to be included in universities. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report too, it has recommendation in there that the knowledge of Indigenous peoples need to be considered when government makes decisions. Section 35 of the Constitution Act states that the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, the traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples, their knowledge of the lands needs to be respected, and it needs to be included whenever there's proposed development on Indigenous peoples' territories. And there's also other legislations within Canada, as well as various recommendations from other reports as well, such as the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Report, where Indigenous knowledge, the right to language, needs to be considered as well. So what I'm going to be talking about is the framework that I'm using and that I developed, which is the three-eyed seeing framework. And this is one lens beyond the two-eyed seeing framework. With the two-eyed seeing framework, it's the Indigenous science and the Western science. So the third lens that I'm including is the lens of our relations, which are those that cannot speak for themselves. The winged, the finned, the crawling, the two-legged, the four-legged, and we need to be the voice for these because Indigenous peoples know that that these are all alive. Trees are alive. When you cut down a tree, you cut down its life. When you change water, you alter the water levels, you do something to the water, you destroy the water, you disrupt the cycle of the water, etc. And the air too, the air, we have to speak for the air. And with Indigenous science, these are the Indigenous stewardship, the foundation of Indigenous stewardship, which are the Anishinaabe laws and the Indigenous laws, but being Anishinaabe, I speak for the Anishinaabe laws, the creation law, natural law, language law, traditional law. So language is really important because within our language, Anishinaabe, when you start to break down the words, you start to understand the root meaning of the words. For example, Anishinaabe, Nabe means person, man. And then Nishina, it means lowering towards the land. So this is what Anishinaabe peoples are, the people of the land. And mowin means the language, the speaking of the language. So Anishinaabe. And Anishinaabe, we have words that describe the stewardship laws that I'm going to be talking a little bit about and not going into detail because this is very specific to other. And if you look across the map of Canada, depending on where you're from, you probably have an Indigenous names of cities, rivers, lake, the provinces even. And these are very important to understand. For example, the work that I'm doing is looking at place naming and identifying what the monitoring, what to look for when we monitor. For example, Saskatchewan means in Anishinaabe means where the water drains into the land. So if you think of the watershed coming from the Rockies, it starts to drain into the land. And the geography of Saskatchewan, there's not that many rivers. There's a major river running through it. There's a few lakes towards the north, maybe smaller lakes, but it's not really a particularly big place for the the waters we typically associate the Lake Manitoba. We have a lot of lakes. So Saskatchewan means where the water drains. And when you start looking at these words, you start to understand the relationship between Indigenous peoples and the land. In Anishinaabe, when we call the earth a ke, and that means everything that is on a ke, like the earth itself with the various cores of the layers and going up to the core, and then the surface water, the ground water, etc. And this is all what we call a ken, everything that lives on a ke, as well as the air, the solar system, etc. And we are not separate from a ke. Everything that we have, the life systems that we have are connected. When we talk about Pimadisiwin, that's what a person does to sustain themselves. What did they get from the land in order to survive? That's what that means. And Pimadisiwin means what I do to look after myself, my well-being, of my life in order to live long or short or whatever it is. And that's what that means. And these are all very closely related to the land, everything about the water. Age, when we talk about a person's age, we ask them in the Sipipune. And so we basically ask a person when we want to know their age, how many winters are you? Pibun in Anishinaabe means winter. So, or when we talk to a person, when we ask a person what is their birthday, we ask a person like to tell us what cycle they were born, and in a Pikanitoigan, like that. So what we speak is very closely related to the way we interact with the land, the earth, the ke. We have seasons, but our seasons, we don't want to define our seasons like the way the Western system does. So Western science defines their seasons like the 4 seasons. We don't want to define them like that. And we define our seasons according to the days, like the days, for example, Picha Gisigan means the days are getting shorter, which means that we're going into the fall. Picha Gisigan, Picha means something. Picha is a measurement, and that's what that is. Picha Kisigan, and Kisigan means a day, but it's not the day we describe as a sunlight. It means that the 24-hour cycle, Kisigan. And then we have Sigan, means springtime, and that's when we talk about Sigan, and that's when we start that it means that the reference that a key is waking up from its deep sleep, but that's what that means, Sigan. And then we recognize that before summer, that there's going to be another winter. And they wait for that to come. They don't, indigenous peoples don't plan for summer. And they don't plan for summer until the other winter comes right in between spring and summer. And they wait, and indigenous peoples wait for that. The Sukipun means snow, so that's what it's called, the Kapi Dun Sukipun. And then Nibin means summer, and Tagogun means fall and the autumn weather. But indigenous peoples know that there's another season between Tagogan and winter, and this is where there's not really a name for it, but they're associated with what happens during the time, and they know that it's 1 or 2 weeks where the sun, where the weather is really nice, and what maybe Westerners call the Indian summer, and coincidentally, it's named Indian summer because the indigenous peoples know that there's another season between fall and winter. And the way the Anishinaabe, the way I was taught was when you see those spider webs, those silky webs flying in the air, and you'll see a whole bunch of them between the fall and the winter, and that's when you know the Indian summer is there. I'll call it Indian summer because that's what the people are used to. And the indigenous people too know that when they don't see those things, and then the season is not there. It doesn't happen every year. Sometimes it's just for a few days, but it's usually a longer time. And they associate that with what's going to happen when it starts getting cold. Pibun is winter, so, and that's when it freezes. And then with the climate change, so I'm not going to elaborate because I just want to talk about the weather. But with climate change, there's a lot of things indigenous people identify with climate change and weather because they're not separate. They're together. So indigenous people know what's happening with the weather, what's going to happen with the climate, etc. So that's another area where that's really interesting. And then indigenous peoples, with my language, Anishinaabe, when we have names for directions, we have north, Kiwit Nung. Ong means direction from to. Wapanung, east. Sawanung, south. Nigabionung, west. So these are really important to understand because they describe the ecosystem the way we understand, like, for example, the bird migration, the way we understand the hibernation of animals. And these are all within the directions. Kiwit Nung, when we start to break down the words, Kiwe means home. And if you think of the behavior of, for example, the birds that migrate, they migrate, they go south in the summertime. No, they go south in the fall. I'm getting myself all mixed up because I came from Chile just about a month ago. So they go south in the wintertime and they come home during spring, summer, because they come home to lay their eggs, breed. They come home to the north, wherever the Arctic, subarctic, northern Manitoba. We have a lot of birds that come home in my area where they breed. So that's what that means. Kiwe, Kiwe means home. Kiwe, Kiwe, no, north. And when we talk about the wind too, they're very closely associated with the directions in the language. Within these directions too, there's meanings within the direction. What is the weather going to be like? And when we talk about the north wind, when we talk about that, we all know that when the wind comes from the north, it's going to be colder. But there's a deeper meaning too with these words. Undaniman, where the direction of the wind, Undaniman, where the wind is coming from. Wabanung, Waban, when you break that down, it means sunrise, regarding specifically with the direction, it's not the same as you would describe morning, sunrise, but it refers to the new day that's coming. Waban, Waban. Wabang means tomorrow. You probably heard about that word, Wabang. So when you talk about the direction, Wabanong, where tomorrow comes from, and that's what that means. Wabaninudin, the direction of the wind. And the indigenous peoples know that depending on where the wind is coming from, the weather that's associated with the winds, they prepare for where the wind is coming from, because the winds coming from the east are usually more rainy, and the winds coming from the north are more cold. And then we have Sawanong, means south. And the word Usawa refers to the color. So because the south, it has color, it has a vivid color, whereas Pibun, white, so it refers to the color, but not really the color. It's really hard to translate words into English, trying to make people understand, so you have to bear with me. And then Sawaninudin, warm winds coming from the warmer part of Ke. And then we have west, Ninga Biwanung. Ninga means where something dissolves. So Ninga, where the day dissolves and become nights. And then the same thing with west. We talk about it, the winds are coming from the west too. With Anishinaabe, laws of the Western methods, the framework regarding the three-eyed seeing is about the creation law, language law, natural law, traditional law, and with the Western methods, these are not just these are just a few examples, but the creation law includes all of them. Language is all of them. Much more the natural law, traditional law, they're all one. They're not separated, and that's the importance of the Anishinaabe laws. They all interact with one another. They're holistic, and that's really important to understand. Natural laws refer to how the earth was created, the original purpose of the waters. Then, like, for example, the way the lakes are, the way the rivers are, the natural cycle, with the rivers, the natural flow of the rivers going into lakes, draining into lakes, etc. which way they flow, going to like for example, at the Hudson Bay, the way the water flows, the natural cycles, and the lands too, the natural lands, the way they're formed, trees, everything that's on the land, the air, the flora, fauna, the cycles. So these are the natural laws, and the language law builds on the natural law, where we have the signs, the indigenous peoples named places and spaces across the country we know as Canada, North America, based on the natural laws. Like, for example, I described Lake St. Martin and what that means in my language, and the Saskatchewan and what that means in the Anishinaabe language. So the language law is very important with where indigenous peoples look after the land, because the language law is embedded of the role of the ecosystem and the purpose of the natural law. And the creation law is the way, when we talk about the creation law, we think of the balance of the earth, or the harmony of everything that's on the earth. And traditional law is that the teachings of the natural law, where indigenous peoples have laws, the ways we respect nature. For example, we have words that are within the language that teaches us how we have to respect the animals, the way we have to respect the land, the way we have to respect the water. Jene, Nikikabatawa, and these are all based on the 7 teachings. And these are really, they're really critical, these words, because this is what guides indigenous peoples, the words. It's already at the half hour, and I'm only halfway through, so I'll be going really fast now. So with the 3 I'd and Western science, we have our relations, Indigenous science and Western science. So for example, I'll give an example. I'll talk about the weather. With our relations, we have the water bodies, the land, forest, the seasons, the weather, the atmosphere as well. The natural law, this is the natural order. This is the way Aki was before development. The way it was when the earth was created. And Western science is about managing, for example, flooding and water. Indigenous people know that land floods naturally once every 50 to 60 years. It's a natural cycle of, it's a way of the world, I was going to say the world, the earth, replenishing itself, renewing itself, giving itself a new life. But since the government and the policymakers think they're the best people who make the decisions regarding water, they tend to control the water flow. They build dams, and they alter the cycles of the water, which goes against the natural law, the way the natural order of things. And when we start to interfere with the natural order, there's a lot of problems created by the decisions the decision makers make. And we have to be respectful of the water too, because water is alive. We have to stop and ask, what does the water want? We don't want to kill all the water, because without water, we would not be on this earth, that we would be dead. So water is part of us. We cannot go about destroying water. Water affects weather, water affects the climate, water affects everything. So we have to respect water and everything life that's on this Zake. And the creation law as well, too. We have words that are very closely related, like within the language of the way, the order of things. Language law is really important. Language law, the weather, climate, places and places, the root meanings of words and the directions. Traditional law, the indigenous ethics, the animal ethics, and the sacred teachings. And these are all related. These are not separated. They interact with one another. And with Western science, it's a little, it goes against these Anishinaabe laws. It kind of counters them, because Western science thinks it's the only science there is, but it's not the only science. We have to work with one another and do the best we can for this planet. Excuse me. Indigenous people, Anishinaabe people, we have a word for what we know as hoarfrost. We call it Nigigoche, which means, I'm sure you heard me when I talked about the directions, west, Ninga. So this is part of that, the root word, Ninga, means, which refers to when the warm air, when the warm air interacts with the cold air. And you've probably seen a lot of these during the winter, when mornings, when it's just covered with frost. So Indigenous peoples know what happens, the climate, when this happens. And Indigenous people, Anishinaabe, know about the seasons. They know about the water. They know about the clouds. With Anishinaabe people, my people, like I keep making reference to Anishinaabe people, because these are my teachings, and this is what I know. The clouds are different for the seasons as well. They're not the same. For the meteorologist, the different cloud formation and different names, stratus, whatever, cirrus, not the same. But the clouds. But depending on the clouds too, what do the clouds look like? They can predict the weather, what the weather is going to be from the way the clouds are. They know when snow is coming based on the clouds, rain, etc. And as well too, Indigenous peoples know about the stars, the moon, the sun. They know what happens when the moon sits, when it looks half, when it's quarter moon, whether it's upside down or the other way, and what that means in terms of weather. Growing up, my mom always showed me the way the sun sets, and what it was going to be like the next day by the way the sun set and the color of the sunset. I always knew, based on that, I always know, not knew, what the weather is going to be like the next day, based on the way the sun sets. So these are things that Anishinaabe people know about the weather. Like they know what the weather is going to be like, based on the moon and the way the moon looks, the way the clouds hang at night. And this is not a very good picture. I didn't want these wires in there, but anyhow. Excuse me. Indigenous people know regarding the water, because a lot of my research is about water. They know this picture was taken near my community of Lake St. Martin. And this is in the summertime, and you can see the dead species that are in this area. And the knowledge holders know that the ground table is rising, so it's killing off the roots. The roots are rotting, so this is why there's a lot of dead stands, and these are throughout my region here. And they refer to this phenomena as mukitshiwanibe, which means the water is coming up from underneath. And when you translate the word to translate when you start going into the root meanings of the words, you'll understand the process. But I don't have time for that, sorry. And sorry. And also our we have to be respectful of our relations because we share the land with them. We share a key with them, and we recognize where a species live when they come home from the south. When they come home in the summertime, they go home and to their homes as well. It's not up to us to start destroying their homes. We have to be respectful of them. We have to ask them. If you don't want to ask them, and do you want to be relocated? No, we have to be respectful of them. We have to be the voice of them. We have to, Indigenous people know species, the way they behave, and the way birds behave. They understand what happens when birds behave a certain way. They understand. Growing up, I was taught to like the way the wind sounds, the way the leaves sound, what that means in terms of weather. And clouds and water are really important because Indigenous peoples, especially the fishers, Indigenous fishers, they use the clouds to monitor their activities. They recognize the clouds, and they recognize the way clouds rule, what that means in terms of weather. Growing up, I was taught to understand the way the wind sounds, the way the leaves rustle, the way leaves turn a certain way, the way the leaves turn a certain color. Because I don't know if people know, but leaves can go from light to green, and depending on the weather too. And these are very important to understand regarding the weather, what the weather is going to be like. I talk about water a lot because we have to be, we are the caretakers of the land. We are the stewards of the land. But sometimes this responsibility gets taken away from us. Indigenous peoples know that Indigenous peoples are closely, they have a close relationship with the land. And when this relationship is taken away, when the land is flooded, for example, and there's a trauma to the land weeps, and that in turn passes on to the people, the Indigenous people. When there's trauma to the land, the Indigenous people feel trauma that's on the land, that is suffered from the land. And this happened when Lake St. Martin, my community, got forced relocated from the flood of 2011, there's a lot of trauma to the land, and in turn, and my people felt that trauma. We have words that are closely related to the waters, to the land, to Pakitawa, refers to a livelihood. When I talked about the Pimajiwin at the beginning of the talk, and the Pimajiwin is the way Indigenous people look after themselves. It's one of Pakitawa is one of the ways Indigenous people look after themselves, where they get fish. Sometimes they harvest, and sometimes it's just for food on the table. When I was at my mom's last night, we had fish, pickerel, and we also had a boiled whitefish. And this is Pimajiwin. This was by one of the fishers that gave us the fish. And Pakitawa is a livelihood. And Pakitawa means where there's an abundance of fish, and that's what that word means, abundance, where there's an abundance of fish, and it refers to the livelihood. Within that word is describing the patterns of the fish, the habitats of the fish, the waterways, the flows, and the currents. And Indigenous peoples know the cycles of the waters, the cycles of the fish, because within the waters there's a species that live within the water too. And we know that one cannot do without the other. And Indigenous peoples know from their words, the Indigenous meanings of the words, what the water is like, what species that live in the water are like. And these are very important to understand when we start to understand weather, because weather is not alone. Weather affects everything, and that's on this. Okay. Excuse me. And it's important that we work with Western science, because we can do we can make more progress in determining what's the best. When we start listening to the water, when we start testing the water and using the Indigenous people's knowledge of the waters as well, and working together. Working together is very important. Indigenous science is really important because the naming of places is really important. They can determine what the conditions were before and what has changed regarding water levels, regarding the landforms of the waters and lands. And it's important that Indigenous peoples identify where the place names are, because they were named based on the function of the ecosystem, what it was, the waters and the lands. And using a modern technology as well is important. This was a few years ago in Lake St. Martin, where I worked with the elders, and then with the place naming of Indigenous names, and we used drones as well, and we used a lot of technology mixed with Indigenous science. So wrapping up, Twitching is important, but I think, no, I don't like to say, I think using the lenses of the third eye is really critical. We have to ask what the third eye is saying. We have to ask what the water is telling us. We have to ask the animals what they're saying, etc. And listening to each other, we can make better better decisions, which can be used for research, etc. That's it.
Well, thanks very much, Myrle. That was excellent. Thanks for the very enlightening talk. I certainly learned a lot. It's fascinating how the Indigenous communities interpret what the natural environment tells us. And yeah, it's very important that we work together to address a lot of the issues, as you pointed out, to to improve our environment and be more respectful of that and the people involved. So thank you very much. I guess we have about 10 minutes or so until the next, we have to prepare for the next science session. So we do have some time for questions. I'll just maybe bring some up here. There are a couple that I've seen online here. So I'll just read them out for you here, Myrle, if you don't mind. So how do you think it is best to practically apply three-eyed seeing in our work, and in particular, build relations between Indigenous and Western science on the level of individual scientists and research groups? That's a really good question.
Yeah, this is the work that I'm doing regarding three-eyed seeing, and it's important to use Indigenous science with the work because Indigenous peoples want the close connection to the land, Ake, which I said is everything, the water, everything on Ake. And Indigenous peoples understand, they know what the waters are saying, and Indigenous peoples can be the interpreters of what our relations are saying. So it's very important to understand that the three together to use them effectively. Like for example, clouds, the way that clouds look, when we want to understand weather, the way species behave, their patterns, behavioral patterns in the, like for example, the fall and the winter, like the summertime, even going into fall, the way species behave. Indigenous people know whether or not it's going to be a cool summer, it's going to be a cold winter, dry winter, etc. And when we make forecasts about flooding, it's important to use the three together, the three voices to make better informed decision making. Because a lot of times Western science alone does not make the right decisions. I've seen that over and over again.
Yeah, I think we can certainly learn a lot from that type of collaboration. I completely agree. Another question. Has climate change affected the Anishinaabe vocabulary? Now, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's a good question, but I don't think it's affected it. I think it's enhanced it because understanding climate change, I think if you understand the root words of the Anishinaabe words, you'll have a better understanding of, you'll have a better I don't like to say appreciate, understanding of climate change, why it's happening, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it for sure.
Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions, but I have one. So I know you recently started at University of Calgary as a Canada Research Chair too, a Tier 2 position. So I'm just curious to know a little bit of what you plan for your, I guess, short-term research, what you're planning to do, what some of your priorities might be.
Yeah. My research is going to be about the three-eyed seeing, but some of the short-term research that I have is working with water, because I have research. I have projects from the Tri-Council that I've had, so I'm transferring them over. So identifying, working with Indigenous people regarding their knowledge. One thing that I want people to understand as people from academia and decision makers as well. We are the knowledge takers. We are not above anybody. We learn from the things that we study. They increase our knowledge. We're taking the knowledge. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be a knowledge taker. I'm going to learn from them. They're going to teach me so that I can increase my knowledge and then I can share with others. Learn from the water. The water is going to tell me something. The trees are going to tell me something. The Indigenous peoples are going to be telling me something. They're going to be the interpreters. So it's a process. So that's what I'm going to do. And well, some of the short term is working with the waterways and identifying the Indigenous names and developing monitoring tools and the indicators from before, what has changed recently to the present, like from the oral histories of the oral tradition, and developing the indicators and not developing, identifying, and from there, what can we learn from them?
Excellent. Well, I know I probably speak for a lot of people here. You know, we wish you well in your research and fascinating work, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the future. It's very exciting stuff. So I guess in the interest of time, there's about 4 minutes left, and I guess they're going to be starting some of the sessions soon. So anyways, on behalf of the CMOS community here, Myrle, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and driving all that way this morning from your community. It's a long drive this morning, so we really appreciate your time. So for those online, I think the first sessions begin at 12:15 p.m. Eastern time. So enjoy the rest of the day's talks. And for presenters and session chairs, I encourage you to join your appropriate Zoom sessions 10 to 15 minutes prior to the session commencement, so you can make sure all your slides work and so on. So thank you again, Myrle. We appreciate your time, and we wish you well. So take care, everybody.